Hi, guys. I'm Mr. Larry, or you may call me Brother Larry. We may be doing that more than we had in the past, but you can call me anything just as long as you call me. I really looking forward to spending some time with you each Sunday morning via video, but I'm really looking forward to the time where we can get Children's Church started back and be together. I really look forward to those times. And I'm going to tell you a story today, but I'm going to do it a little different. I'm going to talk to you about what we would normally say, David slew Goliath. And you say, oh man, I've heard it over and over and over again. Well, I'm going to talk to you about it in a little different direction, a little different angle. So, believe it or not, I'm going to start off in Genesis. My goodness. I want to talk to you about a number that's very special to God. He has some numbers that are special. 40 just happens to be one of those numbers that is special to him. And let's talk about that for just a second. Back in Genesis, okay? Genesis, Exodus, somewhere right around there, the Israelites it's actually Exodus. I'll come back to Genesis. The Israelites had been come out of Egypt, and they're going toward the Holy Land. And they sent the spies out. 2 spies came and said, we can do it. The other 2 spies were not so sure. Anyway, they didn't go. And they didn't follow God's plan. So God had them wander around the wilderness for 40 years. That number 40. Okay, now we'll back up to Genesis and talk about another 40. Not too long, the earth was still new when it got so bad, and God got so disgusted with us that he decided to end it all. But he found Noah. You know about Noah and the ark, another really, really, really familiar story. Well, you might remember it rained for 40 days and 40 nights. But at the end of that time, the storm stopped. Can you imagine being rocked around and everything with the mightiest storm that ever has been, probably never will never be again? It was a terrible storm. Water coming up, coming down, until the whole world, and even the highest mountains, was flooded. But at the end of 40 days, that storm ended. And you can imagine that Noah and his family were celebrating. It's over. And the waters began to recede, go down, and they knew that things were going to get back to normal, and they would get all of the animals that God had gathered and release them. And it would take some time for the water to go down, but at the end of 40 days, something really good happened. Now, remember the children wandering around in that desert or wilderness for 40 days? At the end of that, what did they have happen to them? The promised land. So 40 days, 40 years, when it ended, something good happened. Something good happened. Now, let's get to the main story now with David and Goliath. I want to give you some background, so I'm going to read a little bit in Samuel. Samuel was God's prophet during this time. God used Samuel. Samuel was kind of God's right-hand man for Israel during this period. But I want to read to you from 1 Samuel 9:2. And he being the daddy of Saul. And Saul's dad had a choice and handsome son whose name was Saul. There was not a more handsome person than he among all of the people of Israel. And from his shoulder upward, he was taller than any of the people. So he was by a head and neck taller than anybody else in Israel, and was the most handsome in Israel. You can imagine he got a lot of attention. The Israelites wanted a king, and God told Samuel to go ahead and anoint Saul. And Saul started out pretty good. He really did. But he started doing things his own way, going his own direction, and he lost favor with God. He lost favor with God. We don't want to do that, but Saul did. So God is working with Samuel again about anointing a new king, and he sent him to Jesse. And Samuel told Jesse to come and we'll get together and do the sacrifice. So he had his sons, and he comes in, and immediately Samuel looks around and sees the oldest son, and he thinks to himself, well, that's the guy that God's got to have in mind. And God spoke to him and said, no, not so fast. I don't look at outward appearance like you. I want to read you now 1 Samuel 16:17. Give me a second to turn. (16:7), not 17. It didn't sound right. But the Lord said to Samuel, do not look at his appearance or his physical stature, because I have refused him. The oldest one that, there he is, reading Saul's mind, God. For the Lord does not see a man as man sees each other. Man looks at the outward appearance, but the Lord looks straight into the heart. I often say that God can look in your eyes and see your heart. Well, he had all of the 7 older brothers file one by one. Each time, nope, not him. Nope, not him. Nope, not him. After they were all passed through, there was nobody left. Samuel looks at Jesse, the daddy, and said, is there anybody else? Somebody else. And he said, well, there's the youth. He's out and watching over the sheep. And he said, send for him. And he was so serious about this. He said, yeah, send for him, have him come back. And listen to this. We're not going to sit down until he gets here. So they go scurrying off to get David. When David comes, brought in, Samuel said, he's the man. Samuel anointed David to be the king. He didn't anoint him and immediately started serving as the king. His time would come later, but he anointed him with the oil to be the king. So now let's get to the main part of the story, and I'll tie all this together. During this period, the Israelites and the Philistines were fighting. They just fought and fought and fought and fought and fought. Well, they came to a valley. And in this valley, probably separated by 100 yards or so, the Israelites, their army was lined up on one side of the valley, and the Philistines were lined up on the other side. And every morning and every day, the Philistines would send out their champion. See, it wasn't uncommon for armies to do this. Pick out the champion of each army, let them come together, fight it out, and whoever won, it would be assumed that winner's god was the dominant god and would win the battle. Well, Goliath was huge. He was over 9 feet tall, and about 9.5 feet tall. And the average man during this period was about 5.5 feet. So not quite, but upwards toward twice as big. And of course he'd be wider and stronger and just overall bigger, probably have a deeper voice and on and on. And he had this armor. He had this helmet of bronze that came down like this. And he had this body armor, they called it mail, that was metal. He even had shin guards like you might have when you're playing soccer, and they were metal. He had a huge sword, a huge spear, and a javelin. And he had another guy with him that would carry the shield for him. In today's army, we might think of this as the tank. He was the tank of the time. He was loud. And when he would come out onto the field, when he would say, "Send me your champion. And if I kill him, you serve us. If he kills me, we serve you." When he started out with his loud voices and everything, the Israelite army would flee. That includes Saul. They would run. You know what? A fleeing, running army is not a happy army. It feels defeated. If morale, their feel good is gone. This is a terrible time. You know what? 40. That number comes up again. Goliath came out and did this morning and again in the evening for 40 days. Well, at 40 days, David's back with the sheep. Jesse, his daddy, sends for him, gives him some provisions to go out to the battlefield, provide the provisions to his brothers, and see how they're doing and come back and report. So when David gets out there, lo and behold, Goliath comes out defying God's army. And David couldn't believe it. He looks around and says, "What are we doing? What are we going to do?" He couldn't believe it, that they were running. Well, he started asking questions, and Saul found out that he was asking questions about this, and he sent for David. And David said, "Don't let your men be disheartened. Don't let them have a heart attack. I'll fight the giant." "You can't fight the giant," says Saul. "You're just a youth." "I have been taking care of my daddy's sheep. When a bear would come, God would deliver the bear to me. I would grab hold of it and kill it. The same with the lion. The same thing will happen with that giant. God will deliver him to my hand." David wasn't timid at all. You can almost see David, whoo, whoo, whoo. He's ready to get into this. He's ready to take this battle on because he knows. He doesn't think. He knows the outcome. He knows that God is going to deliver this giant who defied God's own army into David's hand. So Saul said, "Okay." So he tries to put his armor. Now remember, he's the biggest guy in a whole country. He tries to put his armor on David. Well, one, it was really, really heavy. Two, it was really too big. And David tried to walk around. Yeah, well, that wasn't working. He said, "I can't do this." So he took it off. And he said, Saul said to David, "Go and God be with you." So he picks up his staff. Now, shepherds always have a staff with them, and it has a crook in the top of it, in the end. And that's really made so if a lamb falls into a ditch or something, they can reach down with that shepherd's hook and pull it out. It was a good tool. It wasn't a weapon, but it was something that was a part of David. So with his staff and his sling, he leaves to go to do the battle. As he goes through, he picks up some smooth rocks out of the stream. Miss Carolyn, my wife, and I were privileged to be in Israel a few years ago, and we were in that exact valley. And I went into the stream bed. There was no water flowing at that time, and I was able to pick up some round rocks. I wish you could see them. Some round rocks like David would have picked up. He picked up 5. I only have 3. But they're, in my mind's eye, kind of like what he would have picked up. One of these days we'll be together and I'll show you these again. But he picked up 5 rocks, and he put them in his little shepherd's pouch. And he went on to the edge of the valley. Or he was at the edge of the valley. He started progressing toward the giant. And the giant's coming out, Goliath's coming out, and David starts running toward him. What are you, coming with me with sticks? Am I a dog? Goliath couldn't believe it. I'm going to feed you to the birds and the wild animals. David said, no. You come with me with swords and all kinds of weapons, spears. I come with you with my God's power. He will deliver you to me, and you're the one that'll be fed to those birds and animals. So David starts running toward him, pulls out a stone, puts it in his sling, and he's swinging it faster and faster and faster and faster and faster and faster and faster until he lets go with one of the strings so that the stone is flung out of the little pouch. So he goes at the exact moment so that the stone goes on the exact straight path to hit Goliath, who had a helmet on. So his helmet come down, though not much of a target there. But he hits that stone, hits right in the center, bullseye, while he was running. And the giant's also moving. God is doing the delivering. God is guiding all of this. The stone sinks in to this big giant forehead. If you feel your forehead right here, you'll feel it raised up. Part of the skull, cheekbones here, all those bones are to protect the eyes. That's where he was vulnerable because he had a helmet up there. Hit him exactly. Sinks in. Goliath is dead. He falls. Now, usually during this period, when there's a battle such as this, the victor will take a sword and cut off the head of the person who he had just had delivered to him. David had no sword. So what's he do? He takes the one from Goliath, you know this story, and cuts his head off. So here we are, 40 days, a youth following God, faith in God, with all kinds of energy, attacks, and the giant is killed. Guess what? Saul, who should have been the champion, remember, let's back up a little bit. Remember, he was the biggest guy in all of Israel. If anyone was going to fight, it should have been Saul. But he was one of the ones running away. So 40 days, 40 nights, and then Israel has a new champion. His name will be known as King David. And his lineage, from his lineage, will be the king who will rule forever and ever and ever. King Jesus. King Jesus. See, David had great faith in God. He wasn't extraordinary in his body, but God would deliver things to him. God made him a champion. And you know what? He would be out there in those fields, and I can imagine he's out there by himself. He did a lot of talking to God. David is a man after God's own heart. So, there he is, the new champion. Guys, if you will talk to God, if you will trust God, if you will depend on God, if you will hold on to God, you can do anything that God wants you to do. If you will make yourself available, you can be a champion. How many of you want to be champions? You can do it. In the coming weeks, we'll be talking about heaven. I want you to start getting excited about a discussion of heaven. When I was your age, I thought heaven would be boring. I thought we were floating on clouds. I want to talk to you about heaven and what an amazing place it's going to be, what a fun place it's going to be. So, let's start getting excited about that. I hope you enjoyed this version of David that slew Goliath. We might ask the question, who really slew Goliath? You might come up with the idea God did. He was in complete control. And that's it for today. I'll speak with you again next Sunday. Goodbye.